Hey, so last night with my friend, I had a Ghostbusters marathon. Basically, watched all three films: the 1984 original, Ghostbusters II, 1989, and the remake of 2016. I have to say, I like all three, including, by the way, the remake. I think I'd done a review of that at the time. I totally understand the contentions around it, by the way, but I do think it was quite entertaining in its own right. Notwithstanding its flaws, um, I think it was entertaining. I think the special effects were good. Anyway, what I want to do here is lay out my reasons why Ghostbusters 2, the 1989 version, is better than the original. I don't really want to contrast the 2016 one with the other two because it's very different, obviously being four women, and it's not just that, but other aspects of it as well. And I think that's been widely debated. So um, rather, I want to contrast one and two. So Ghostbusters 1984 versus Ghostbusters 2 1989. And here's consistency. There's a cover of Ghostbusters Answer the Call. Okay, so it's widely held that the original Ghostbusters is the best of the films. And the important thing with that is it laid the groundwork. Okay, this I feel is often the argument used for original films generally, whether it be Rocky, the first Rocky, Jaws, and so on. But I've never really agreed with the idea that just because a film is the first in a series, it therefore translates that it must be the best. What an original film does is it lays the groundwork for the concept, for the idea, for the characters. And in its own right, Ghostbusters is a good film. But I personally think it's definitely not as good as the sequel. And there's quite a few reasons as to why I believe that is. Now, I appreciate not everyone would agree. A lot of people would say they're on par or even that the original is better. Commercially speaking, the second one had a slightly higher budget, but performed not as well. I think it got 215 million at the box office. The original got 270 million. But when I think of both films, and I've watched them both many times, I really think that the second one for me is the more impressive of the two films. So let's consider some of the reasons, right? When we think of the Ghostbusters, we think of the four characters, right? Venkman, Ray, Egon, and Winston. But people forget that in the first film, Winston is only really brought in halfway through, and he's only really developing as a Ghostbuster. By the second film, he's definitely one of the group. He's definitely, a Ghostbuster. That's an important aspect, I think. Um, Another thing about the second film, this is a franchise. This is a series of films that whereby visual style, visual effects, and so on is very important. And I think that whilst the first film had some good special effects for the time, I mean the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man and the dogs and so on, I think there are far more memorable scenes from the second film. I mean, the second film, you have the Scoleri brothers, the whole courtroom sequence. I thought that was very memorable. The haunted train, I always remember the line where they're sort of saying, no, no, these lines have been abandoned for 50 years. And then you see the train coming. Very spooky, very effective. Um, and then the finale. I mean, if we can contrast both films, I really think that Ghostbusters 2 has a more impressive finale. Um, I mean, you can't tell me that Stay Puft Marshmallow Man is more impressive than a walking Statue of Liberty. I mean, to me, that was just visually very well done. It's iconic. The Titanic sequence was well done. Apparently, that was originally going to be the Hindenburg. But those lines at some stock supervisor down in Pier 34, actually it was 54 in real life, but anyway, he says the Titanic's just arrived. For me, there's more memorable lines in the second film. And remember, these are comedies as well. So, I mean, the second film it's absolutely full of memorable lines and funny scenes. The first film had them as well, but I just think the second film more so. Soundtrack. I've always put a lot of weight on soundtracks in films, and the first film had the main Ghostbusters theme by Ray Parker, which is a great song. You know, one of the iconic songs of the 80s. But that's really the only track in that film that was memorable. Ghostbusters 2, you have Bobby Brown, you have the I don't know who done the cover, but Higher and Higher, which was originally I think Jackie Wilson performed that, and it was updated for the film, and recently Joe Biden used it in his victory speech. But it's not just about having a good soundtrack; it's about putting it in at the right moment. And I just thought it was amazing with the Statue of Liberty walking around, having that music. It works really, really well. Peter Mcnichol, his role in the second film was very important. He was a supporting character, but a very memorable supporting character, and a great actor, in my opinion. Um, and then let's look at the villains. I mean, Gozar, Zool, creepy enough. Certainly, there's the whole scene with Sigourney Weaver kind of getting possessed, clearly nods there to The Exorcist. It was creepy enough, but I think in a head-to-head, Vigo the Carpathian is hard to beat. Also, he is the dominant presence throughout the film, whereas with Zool, you only really see her at the end. I just think, on balance, the second film is just for me far more memorable overall. Um, And I think Vigo definitely helped as a villain. He's genuinely creepy. Um, and he was played by the German boxer Willem von Homburg, I believe. Um, so he had a physically menacing presence. Zoe was creepy enough, but yeah. Now the new Ghostbusters is 2016 one. They got the ghost itself as a kind of finale monster creature, and also the character. Forget his name now, but the thing with that 2016 film, I'll just mention this briefly because I honestly think it needs to be looked at as a film in its own right rather than contrasted to the other two. Um, it, it was visually impressive. I think a lot of the ghosts were good. Um, there was a lack of originality in the sense that it's pretty much the same storyline as to how, in this case, the four women get together and so on, but they alternated slightly. I do think some of it was genuinely funny. I think that there was probably a backlash because people saw it as there's a general backlash, I think, to reboots of films. But I think people need to look at films in their own right rather than just saying automatically how much better it is than the last one. With Ghostbusters 1 and 2, I make an exception there because it was the same cast. So it is much easier to link the films. And by the way, that 2016 one, most of the cast, with the exception of the late Harold Ramis, make cameos. And from what I gather, they approved of it. There was also Ghostbusters something that was going to be released this year but was held back for COVID. It's a totally different take on it, where some kids in a rural community come across old tapes of the original Ghostbusters in New York City. It's got no relation whatsoever to the 2016 one. It's worth noting, by the way, the 2016 film, although it was controversial, it actually done quite well commercially, and apparently it's got 74% on Rotten Tomatoes, so it wasn't a total kind of blowout. People gave thumbs down on the trailer before they'd even seen the film. I do think there was a sense there was a bit of political correctness going on because, oh, let's just make them women. But I don't know. I must admit I find it quite entertaining. Certainly not the best film, but I think Ghostbusters 2 stands up strong. I really like Ghostbusters 2. I like the whole feel about it. I like the special effects. I love that end sequence. I think it was very well done. So let me know your thoughts on the Ghostbusters films. I personally think Ghostbusters 2 is superior than Ghostbusters. Even I've just remembered another thing. When they're looking up at the painting, and they say I believe it's one of the fettuccinis, and it's like a Renaissance painting for Ghostbusters. There's nothing like that in the first film. I just think the whole camaraderie, the feel of the second film is a lot stronger. The first film's important; it makes the groundwork, you know, as to why the Ghostbusters are set up and so on. But I just think, on balance, the second film is superior, and I think it's a rare example of a sequel being better. Another example of that is Adam's Family Values is a lot better than the Adams Family. So, but this is all. I always say when it comes to films, it really, really is, um, subjective. It ultimately does come down to personal taste. So, for example, I'm saying the soundtrack in the second film is really good. Some people might prefer the soundtrack in the first film. I just think the second one's more memorable. Let me know your thoughts.